Can we speak of a new East-West split? How has our understanding of the two halves of Europe, shaped by the Iron Curtain, changed in the past 3 decades? The legacy of division, East and West after 1989, is Eurozine's new anthology, addressing these questions and more, published in English by CEU Press in 2020 and in Slovenian by Slavoj Žižek in 2021. In this comprehensive volume, 35 authors revisit the ideas of Easternness, political and cultural exchange, and evaluate the democratic processes of the past 30 years. Adam Reichardt, editor-in-chief of Eurozine's Polish partner journal New Eastern Europe, moderated an online discussion to launch the book with the curators and 4 authors of the volume: Jill Massino, Jannis Panagiotidis, Simona Skrabec, and Bogdan Iacob. Here's a short recap of the event.
Naturally, divisions exist between the former Eastern Bloc and countries outside it, but of course, divisions also exist between Northern and Southern Europe, between continental Europe and the UK. So what do we actually mean by divisions? Are these political, economic, or cultural divisions? Are they social divisions? Are they divisions in perception or experience, or a combination of these? What about rural and urban divisions? On a related note, do political divisions necessarily translate into economic divisions, as was the case during the Cold War? Or can political divergence coexist with economic convergence? As Bogdan and others have argued, the political divisions that have emerged since the global financial crisis are not distinctly East European, as populism and democratic backsliding are evident in different parts of the globe, including in the West. At the same time, this process has regional specificities. And if we look at the case, of course, of Hungary and Poland, where populism and illiberal governance is paired with and even legitimated by claims of being authentically European, we see this. So according to this line of reasoning, LGBTQ communities and feminists, among others, become symbols of Western decadence, while in addition to refugees and certain ethnic minorities, and they're seen as alien to populist leaders' narrow conception of the nation and, in fact, Europeanness. And obviously, this exclusionary conceptualization of Europeanness not only goes against what we associate with the EU, at least on paper, but it also reverses the traditional power dynamic between East and West. And so according to this logic, the West should aspire to be more like the East. It is the West that should get its act together and catch up. As with most populists, however, these populists, mainly men, are opportunists, or perhaps maybe that's all they are. And while they claim to be purging the body politic of cosmopolitanism, protecting the nation from outsiders amassing at their border, as well as those within them, the reality on the ground is more complex. The West is not always a source of contamination, especially when money is involved. Western businessmen who set up shop in the region are welcomed with open arms. And blue-collar migrants from China and Thailand and elsewhere are all right as long as they're cheap and they keep their mouths shut. Leaders from the region have thus effectively exploited the EU, non-European laborers, and people's sense of vulnerability for political and economic gain. And they have done so not only in Hungary and Poland, Bulgaria and Romania, but also in non-EU member states. Meanwhile, the EU assumes the role of the indulgent parent, or that gives or forgives, and looks askance when their children misbehave or slaps them on the wrist. As of late, populism seems to be contagious in the region, as new kids have appeared on the block, flexing their exclusionary muscle. While their policies often include increased social entitlements, which largely explains their popularity, various groups have experienced restriction, discrimination, and undermining of their human rights. And here, women of childbearing age, journalists, members of LGBTQ communities, cultural figures, immigrants, among others, can be included. So I would actually like to shift the focus from the populists to the population, from how populists fabricate and exploit divergences to how divergences figure into ordinary people's experiences and perceptions. For while the West and the EU have become Orbán and Kaczynski's whipping boys, giving the impression that East Europeans have strayed or diverged from the idea of Europe and the ideals of liberal democracy, on a popular level, support for the EU remains relatively high and has actually gone up in places like Romania, where as of last month, it was 58%.
So what I would basically argue is that there is an old-new divide, if you will, a West-East divide, which is not identical in content with the Cold War divide, but actually harks back to the time before that, and brings back some of the less pleasant traditions of supposedly non-divided Europe before 1945. And once again, I think what's also interesting to bear in mind here is that there's once again a mix of prejudice at stake here. So while in the past, anti-Semitism was so important in defining the East as different and then sort of enhancing, as I called it, anti-Eastern racism, now anti-Gypsy prejudice, anti-Ziganism, whatever you want to call it, informs a lot of the hostility against East Europeans and especially against Southeast Europeans. Whether they are from the free movement countries of Romania and Bulgaria or from the non-free movement countries of former Yugoslavia or from Albania. So to give you one example, in the town where I used to live in Germany, in Osnabrück, there was a relatively sizable immigration from Bulgaria. Free movement immigration, of course, but these immigrants were framed in the media as, first of all, as a sort of dangerous parallel society that was forming in a marginalized district of the city, and they were also depicted as abusive of the welfare state, basically. And nobody ever used the term Gypsy or referred to Roma or whatever, but the implications were kind of clear, just like the implications were clear when Germany, during the so-called refugee crisis, tried to clamp down, especially on immigration from the Western Balkans, as they would call it, which is a term that I don't think ever existed, but now has become a synonym with sort of illegitimate asylum migration, which again very often is associated with Roma. So in this sense, we have also return of some unhappy alliances of prejudice here. What about the future? And there, I would like to touch on this issue of convergence, and specifically that kind of negative convergence, if you will, that Bogdan and Jill both alluded to. So there is actually the possibility that that this division, this internal division of Europe, as you will, can be overcome in a none too pleasant way against other, so to speak, and against an other from the outside, be it refugees, be it whatever you frame it, refugees, Muslims. So basically an external other that Europeans can construct their sameness against. And I think to some extent this is actually happening. That's again this kind of convergence on the right that we already heard about, and that is really not, I believe, what we should be aspiring to, but this is definitely something we have to deal with in the coming years.
We are now deepening differences between North and South, and these differences are very deeply rooted. There are old prejudices in literature and art that exist and are again visible. But still, the South, what is here important is that the South does not represent only just a fear from outside, but South is also in our literary and artistic tradition also an utopia of different way of life, of the place where we can escape of our order, of our oppressions. And this idealistic South, for example, the tourist industry is exploding very successfully, rests on this longing for the South. So the South, of course, this kind of South does not exist, but the social tensions are worse in the countries that were colonized and excluded from the progress for centuries. But the colonial power did not completely destroy the solidarity between people. So the South somehow knows how to survive in difficult circumstances. And here also it generates a strange envy of the North, because South knows how to function without stability.
After 1989, the discourse of European integration and everything that entails has been linked to the idea of whether the East is white enough for the West, and that whiteness being reflected not in race itself, but in patterns of representing civilization and representing how a normal behavior of a European citizen should be. And this is, again, where the disconnect, and we tie back to sovereignty, comes back in reference to 1989 and how that was exploited, because as Jill was mentioning, nowadays the left or right-wing populists are actually arguing that the West is not white enough because of multiculturalism, political correctness, immigration, so on and so forth, and that the East is actually defending that whiteness founded on Christianity, on family values, and conservatism, generally speaking.
I would like to thank Eurozine and all of their support for organizing this event. And please do check out the book. It is a great publication, and I think one that should be on the shelves of many Europeans who are interested in learning about these divisions and how we can overcome them as well.
You can get to know more about where racism against Eastern Europeans comes from, or what Viktor Orbán has learned from Slavoj Žižek, if you listen to the full conversation on Eurozine's YouTube channel. Link is in the description, and you also find it scanning this QR code. The discussion was moderated by Adam Reichardt, Editor-in-Chief of New Eastern Europe. You can read the speakers' articles in Eurozine in the focal point of the identical title, The Legacy of Division. You'll find links in the show notes. And now for the main event of the evening, our discussion with journalists from Hungary, Turkey, and Russia about freedom of press, repression, and finding their voice under pressure.